Up next on Way of the Renaissance Man, a discussion with a modern-day Hank Rearden on philosophy, business, the dangers of zero-sum thinking, and the virtue of gratitude.
Welcome to the Way of the Renaissance Man podcast. This is a show about ideas, personal empowerment, and celebrating the rational life. Our goal is to help each other discover the tools needed to better focus our minds, integrate our thoughts with actions, and live the lives we really want. I'm your host, Jim Woods.
Fans of Ayn Rand's magnum opus Atlas Shrugged will know the character Hank Rearden. He's the business executive that runs his company by the principles of reason and rational self-interest. Today's guest is someone Jim considers a modern-day Hank Rearden, J. Lapeyre. Jay is the president of Lapeyre LLC, a diversified global manufacturer of plastic conveyor belting, shrimp processing equipment, and space-saving stairs. He is a member of the Tulane University Board of Administrators, and Jay is the board chair of the Atlas Society in Washington, D.C. In this episode, you'll learn about Jay's intellectual awakening while playing college basketball at the University of Texas. You'll also learn about his lifelong journey of integrating philosophy with business and how the two are inextricably linked. The discussion then goes on to Jay's work with the Atlas Society and how he lends his passion to the organization to help promote and disseminate Ayn Rand's revolutionary ideas. And now, here's Jim's conversation with J. Lapeyre.
J. Lapeyre, thank you for being on the podcast.
Oh, wonderful to be here, Jim. Thanks for inviting me.
So you are someone who I know about quite well. We talked last year when we were at the Freedom Fest conference. We're here this year at the Freedom Fest conference. And I always said that I wanted to interview you because you kind of remind me of a modern-day Hank Rearden from Atlas Shrugged. So tell us about your life a little bit. Tell us about how you became not only a industrialist, but also someone interested in philosophy and the philosophy of Ayn Rand, objectivism, and you're head of the Atlas Society. How did that all come about? I mean, where did that all kind of cultivate from? You know, start wherever you feel like you want to start.
Well, you got to correct the Hank Rearden thing. No, I'm a guy who doesn't have original thoughts. I never have. What I do is I take ideas pretty seriously, and I try to understand them, and I try to make sure that they're ultimately mine, meaning I apply my independent judgment to them. But there's very little that I feel I've done that is new. I accept to integrate and apply things to my world, which obviously are new because it's my world. I was a pretty serious Catholic and had a roommate in college. We were both on the basketball team at Texas, and he introduced me to Rand. And it began a journey that is an intellectual journey that continues to this day, that has allowed me to take these principles, which fundamentally it's face reality, it's apply reason. It's be introspective in a way where you really challenge yourself to be objective about what truth is, and search for truth, and then recognize that human beings are self-interested, and that that pride and that sense of achievement and moral ambitiousness, all of that comes from the idea of pursuing what's important to me in a way that's ethical, that I think has been a powerful motivator for me to create an organization, business organization that aligns that. So I have tried to be a magnet to attract some Hank Reardens,
right,
and create a culture. And so we have. My father was an inventor, and he used to talk about God's law all the time, and it was really a powerful influence on me because. People said he was hard-headed and only cared about his own ideas. But when I would deal with him, I'd realize you give him one fact and he would immediately change if that fact resonated as foundational to undermine an assumption of his. But it didn't matter if you took all the PhDs from MIT or all the experts, and he would just, those people are idiots. He would, if he didn't see it.
Yeah, if he didn't see the virtue of the idea. It wasn't about the degrees.
Right.
And yeah, that's an interesting problem, because a lot of people look at the degrees or the person's pedigree and they think, well, how can he be wrong? But most often they are.
Yeah, and he applied that independence his whole life, and we struggled financially. But when I joined the business, he was not a business manager, but that idea integrated with what I knew to be true about Rand, and so all these ideas sort of came together for me. And the business was small and struggling, but we've built it now to a pretty good sized business, and we make industrial products, and we're the world leader in pretty much the games we're in. So
tell me about some of the industries that you're
well,
into.
the biggest business we have by far is modular plastic conveyor belting, and recently we've also gotten into high-speed package sorting. So we have a niche in the UPS, sort of a fulfillment game where we can get more throughput, reduce the defect, missort errors, that sort of thing. So it's a high-tech, sensor-driven business. We also do seafood processing, and we make some alternating tread stairs for construction and other things. So.
Do you do any business that is affected by the whole trade war situation? Yeah. Tell me about that.
I think that the policies on trade are really mistaken, and we're organized globally by industry. So we make products, conveyor belts, which serve all kinds of industries, and we organize by that industry. So, for example, we'll have a tire industry that everyone speaks English, and we organize globally to support, say, a Michelin. Well, everything we do gets sent into tizzy when you have this kind of uncertainty with trade. And it's just a fundamentally flawed approach. I mean, there are lots of issues that need addressing, but the trade deficit is not one of them. And to call it a trade war only increases the idea that trade is win-lose, which is really foundationally flawed.
Yeah,
and really is a big mistake. So
that's the problem I have with it. It's
right.
the framing of the issue is completely irrational.
Exactly.
If I want to buy something from a Chinese manufacturer,
right.
that is my voluntary choice, and they're voluntarily selling it to me.
Exactly.
There should be no government involvement in that whatsoever.
Right.
I mean, other than possibly like some kind of safety thing or something like that, along those lines. But even then, it's the one buyer wants something, another buyer wants another thing. And the idea that the trade deficit matters is ridiculous. I have a trade deficit with my barber.
Right.
He cuts my hair. I give him money, he cuts my hair. He doesn't come to my house and subscribe to my newsletters.
Right. It's called specialization, and it's what makes our prosperity possible.
Exactly.
It's insane. It's even, but there's some subtleties to it that matter a lot. And one is that by acting like it's win-lose, like it's a zero-sum game, what you get is an alignment in culture behind the nation. So each nation then starts to think their interests are about the enemy and protecting themselves against the enemy. And I think that's a very dangerous way to think. And we had come a long way away from that. And I can see that there's a lot there. And anyway.
I completely agree with that. I mean, because if you are pitting a certain group of citizens and their interests against another group of citizens based on the country,
right.
Okay, and you're flaming up, and there's also, of course, some racial aspects to it, because Chinese are not the predominant racial makeup in the United States, so it's an easy demon. It's easy to demonize by country and by race, but you're not helping anybody. And as a matter of fact, all you're doing is hurting the people that like your company, let's say, that wants to bring some some stuff in from China that has to pay a 25% tariff on it.
And what it'll do is it'll force us to do to move more manufacturing offshore, because we'll have to move more to China in order to serve that market. And calling it a war is really about the worst idea possible.
I couldn't agree more. Because the trade is the opposite of war.
Exactly.
You know,
Exactly.
If there's freedom
Right.
to trade, there's not going to be not going to be bullets flying. As soon as you put the barriers up, then you start doing
That's
that.
right.
So it's interesting that you mentioned that because you went to University of Texas, right?
I did. Yeah.
Okay. You played. You had a. You
Well,
were,
I
you were in
practiced.
basketball.
I practiced for 4 years. They were trying to win the game, so they didn't want to play me.
Okay.
But my roommate played.
So your roommate turned you on
Right.
to Ayn Rand.
Yeah.
So I had a similar situation as well. Like I wasn't on any sports teams, but when I was at school, UCLA, a guy that I know that I worked out with introduced me to. He said, "I think you're a kind of. I hear you talking. You're a philosophical kind of guy. Why don't you check this book out?" And it was Atlas Shrugged.
Yeah.
So that was my first introduction. So I went straight for to tackle the biggest bull in the place. But it was awesome,
Yeah.
So now, did you start with Atlas?
No, I
or?
started with the nonfiction.
Oh, okay.
And it was only 10 years later that I read the Atlas Shrugged. So I read Capitalism, the Unknown Ideal, and I read The Virtue of Selfishness, and I read some of the nonfiction. I don't remember all of it, but I also read some of the Austrians, and I read Hazlitt, and I read Bastiat, and some von Mises, but I really wore out on von Mises.
It's hard to get through human action.
I had to get the the for me to stay.
Human action's a commitment.
Yeah, right.
It's like a 900-page book or something like that. I did manage to make my way through it. But it's definitely. I mean, plus there's some things in there that philosophically are a little bit off the beaten path from the economics, but it's a brilliant work.
Yeah, sure.
I found Hazlitt's Economics One Lesson to be like.
I love Hazlitt.
One of the
I think he's a really underrated writer. He's not an objectivist, and he's got some things that are more on the. But he's a terrific writer and thinker, really.
Yeah, definitely, I agree. I agree. Now, tell me about your work with Atlas Society.
Well, the Atlas Society is engaged to try to promote the ideas of objectivism, and that's really put it in language that I think will be more appealing. Historically, Rand was dealing in a different world, and she used the word selfishness. Today, that comes across as mean and a little bit, and it's misunderstood, so people think of it as dog-eat-dog materialism. And what she meant by it was selfish in the way of making your best life and creating the most aspirational and inspired view of what you can be.
I think she kind of defined it as rational self-interest.
Exactly.
But I think you probably recall reading this or something. I think I read this. She used the selfishness part just as a provocateur kind of word to keep people.
I think she meant it in a literal way, and she's saying that if you're you use reason and you're selfish, you get there. So right. I think that was, and I think there was a certain always Rand being. Rand and being combative in the sense of challenge and I think
challenge the status quo.
But I think there's a couple of things that we've done that we think are really important that help to clarify. And one is that we've elevated. David Kelly wrote a book on the self-interested, benevolence as a self-interested virtue, a major self-interested virtue, and I think that helps to frame, so we call it benevolent and ethical self-interest. And that way it makes it really impossible for someone to then say, so it's just about lie, cheat, steal, and be dog, eat dog.
Yeah, exactly.
So we start with that.
Yeah, the corruption of the concept is
exactly.
You remove it from
and we're also trying to explore, and this is more the layman pushing the philosophers, to say, is gratitude a major self-interested virtue? And the reason that's such a big deal is that you look at entitlement and victimhood and resentment and all these things today, and they all are emotionally and psychologically very destructive to happiness. So, but gratitude is the one thing that the positive psychology guys have started to come up with the research that says, if you have a sense of gratitude, you're gonna be, develop the antibodies that protect you from that victimhood mentality. You're also going to be a little more clear thinker. You're going to find third ways to solve problems. You're not going to be demonizing as fast. And so we're trying to explore that a little bit. And wherever it comes out philosophically, it's definitely an area we're trying to push as a virtue.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think that's a good angle.
Yeah.
Because I think we need more kind of familiar concepts to be integrated into the body of the work that of course, Ayn didn't have, isn't around to do that, but we are, and as long as we can kind of agree on what those ideas are. Now, of course, there hasn't always been agreement in the objectivist community on a lot of things, but I think it would be nice to see that agreement kind of permeate throughout.
The amazing part is that objectives agree on 99.9%, and then they spend time disagreeing and fighting over the 1%. At the point where we get to the world where that would matter, it would strike me that, but until then, I think the first place to say this is a philosophy that Rand described as for living on Earth, for achieving happiness on Earth. And I think if we can convey that and inspire more people to think about how to make their lives great, and then also recognize that it provides the moral foundation for a free society, which is foundational to the liberty we have, because the economic arguments, I think they've been made, and they're important because, but the place that I think is weakest in the libertarian movement is on the moral, ethical arguments, and that's what I think we still try to do.
There's a lot of disagreement on morality, and it's unfortunate because, like you said, 99% of in terms of objectivism, but even in the liberty movement, there's a lot of people that are in agreement with the idea of liberty. It's just the morality behind it. And if you don't have that, if you don't have a rational morality codified, then, let's have our liberty and let's sacrifice. Well, they don't go together, but some people are arguing for that. And it's up to us to make it, make them think that it's wrong-headed enough. But I always say the only antidote to bad ideas is good ideas.
Exactly.
So we got to promulgate those as best we can.
That's right.
So what about your personal life? What do you, what do you do for fun?
Well, I mean, I work a lot, but I enjoy what I do. I mean, I really do love my work. And I've got a marriage that has lasted now 40 years, and that's pretty good. And I've got 3 kids, and I've got a 4th grandchild on the way. Those are a lot of fun, and that's relatively new. So we built a pool in the backyard so that the grandkids will want to come over.
Exactly.
But
so you don't have to go to the dragkids either. Right, make them come to you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I work with people that I respect and admire every day, and I've gotten to be engaged in what I think is really important work from this Atlas Society work as well. So I get a lot of psychic reward from my work, from my family, from all that I do, and I also get engaged in in our sort of political world on a local level, the state and city level, because let me just say there's enough opportunity for improvement that it's not hard to make it better.
Yeah, exactly.
Hard to make it perfect.
A few tweaks or make a little difference.
Right, so,
well, I think one of the important things, just speaking with you, is you have what I call a beautiful sense of life. Yeah. Ayn Rand called it a sense of life of, and because you bring the passion of your ideas to the real world in your work. And I could just tell by talking to you, we've talked in the past, that you kind of celebrate every day like that. Yeah, that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah. I want to. Oh, thanks. And I genuinely feel that way. I also had the benefit, and I mean that in a way that'll be hard for many people to understand. But I had a cancer, and I have a cancer, and when that threatens you, you reflect a bit harder, and you think about how precious what you have is, and then you appreciate a lot more deeply. So instead of being crippled or dead, I am living an amazing life and time thanks to modern medicine. So that's another point of gratitude for me. So you start with all of the ideas of reason and achievement and science and all the things that have made that possible. Right. And look at my life, and with the people who live at the best time in human history,
Exactly. I always say there's nothing more fortunate than to be in a 21st century America as a person with a curiosity and the ability to speak for yourself. That wins the day every day.
I heard a comment earlier today at walking around that They said the question about artificial intelligence is whether it's a match for human stupidity. That's the question. I think we have an amazing opportunity if we can just figure out how to not screw it up.
Yeah. Well, on that note, thanks so much for being on the Way of the Renaissance Man podcast.
Enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun.
Yes. Thank you. Thanks, Jay.
Thanks.